Hey, how's it going? Let's look at some comics. I had this stack of comics that's sitting over here. This is stuff that I was planning on reading, but I haven't gone. Well, it's really rereading. This is all stuff I've already read, but we're just going to go through and look what's in the stack. This is stuff that I'm going to be reading soon. I'm going to be reading the first few issues of The Warlord. This is number 3. I feel like this might have been the very first issue of Warlord that I ever bought on vacation, is when I got first started reading Warlord during summer vacation, maybe about 1975, maybe 1976 when I first discovered Warlord. And I can remember buying Warlord, at like a convenience store near a hotel, and then taking it home and reading, taking it back to the hotel and reading in the hotel, which was like a summer activity for me a lot. This is the 4th issue. These are really fun comics. This is a really good story. I would recommend Warlord if you've been passing on Warlord for years and years. Great story and art by this guy, Mike Grell. He wrote and drew the whole thing. It's really cool what he did, too. Maybe this was my first issue, now that I think about it. This might have been the first one. But once again, these were all purchased, at convenience stores off the rack when I was a kid. So it was all probably about the same summer, right about the same time. And then I was able to keep buying Warlord because Warlord was a comic that wasn't really popular where I was living at the time. What I mean by that is that I was reliant upon Safeway. I purchased my comics at a supermarket at that time. I wasn't really aware of let's do it the other way. I wasn't really aware of how the comics arrived. Like, I didn't know what day of the week comics showed up or what time. So when I showed up at the supermarket to buy comics, all the best stuff would be gone. You're not going to find any Spider-Man or Avengers, Hulk, Iron Man, Captain America. All those big popular Marvel titles at the time in the mid '70s weren't really around at the place where I was able to buy comics at that time. So Warlord, though, it was. Nobody was really seemed that interested in Warlord, and there would always be a copy or two. This all came from that exact same time. That's why these are so sequential. Really, it's part of the reason why my Warlord collection is sequential like this is because these books were always on the rack where I was going to. And when I would see one, I would be pleasantly surprised because I loved these stories. It's a real quick read. He does this thing in here where every issue he does a double page spread, kind of like Jack Kirby used to in the old days. Remember how Kirby used to do that in his own books, or he did it like in the Demon sometimes in 2001, all that early '70s stuff. So each issue will open like this, with a little introduction, and then wha-bam! Enter Scartaris, world of eternal light, if I remember right. It never gets dark where he's at. From the sky he came to a world of eternal sunlight and eternal savagery. Travis Morgan, man with a lust for adventure and passion for freedom. As his fame spreads, so grows the legend of the Warlord. Michael Grell. Cool, huh? So each issue's got this double page spread, and look at this, how awesome this is. Can you see why a 9-year-old me was happy to find this on the rack every month? Really fun stuff. So this is a cool story. Morgan here, he was an Air Force pilot. If I remember right, his jet crashed like over, where is he? Is this Antarctica or is it over Alaska? I forget. But he finds this sort of, and she is so hot. I forget her name right. Mariah? I think her name's Mariah. Anyway, whew. Anyway, he finds this very Edgar Rice Burroughs world of like the land that time forgot, right? And it's a world with no darkness. It never gets dark there. It's always light there. It's like he's like at the top of the earth or something like that. I don't remember, but and like he crash lands in this world that's on Earth. Like it's not the center of the Earth. I mean, it's kind of like I just explained. It's kind of like where Kazar is from, or Kazar. I like, is it Kazar or Kazar? Kazar sounds so much like kazoo. I always said Kazar. I don't know. Anyway, it's kind of like the Savage Land. There's all these different, but at the same time, look, there's technology. It's real futuristic, and he's doing battle with this guy Deimos. That's him back there, and he's like this evil wizard or warlock or something. Here he is, right here. He's got Travis's baby. This thing it's very episodic as well. So at the beginning, even though every issue is self-contained, there's progression. The characters are added. The story builds, and it's episodic, like a soap opera a bit. Travis, if I remember right, he's searching for the girl that he loves. Her name is Tara. He eventually finds her. Here she is right here. They have a baby. He grows these horns. She's hot too. All the girls are hot in here. Mike Grell is an excellent artist, man. He did a great job. It's a cool cover. Wolves of the Steppes. This guy right here, his name is Machiste. He's Travis's like right hand man. Like he's not. They're just partners. They're friends, partners. He gets his hand cut off early on, and it's replaced with that mace. Isn't that cool? Here's this guy Deimos. He's a real asshole. That scar is kind of badass. He's got in his face. Whoa! Look at that. We jump. So we jump right from Warlord to Amazing Spider-Man number 101. With the first appearance of Morbius the Vampire. Now, this isn't the first appearance of Morbius the Vampire. This is just an appearance of Morbius, right? Monster called Morbius. I don't think is this Morbius' first appearance? I don't know. This is one of my earliest comics. It really is. This is like a comic that I bought when I was very little, like maybe 7 or 8. And I guess I was probably at the time didn't know very much about Spider-Man, just what I had seen on television in the cartoon, in that old cartoon, the original Spider-Man cartoon. I really don't think anything else. I think that this was it. This was the beginning for me. And I loved horror and monster movies from a very, very early age. Like from 5 or 6, I was into this stuff, and so I'm sure I saw this image, and I was like, "Holy crap, that looks really cool!" It's some sort of a super vampire. And then what? The Spider-Man grew 6 arms. Now I might have pulled this down off the rack too and opened it up, because on the inside, it immediately gets good when you see this. You're like, wow. As a little kid, I remember I didn't know anything. I had no clue who this guy Gil Kane was, right? I was far from being Gil-pilled at this point. Look at that lineup right there. Roy Thomas and Gil Kane. But I can remember just popping this open. I was like, hey, you can't take my 15 cents quick enough when I saw the inside of this. So this is a kind of beat up book as far as like my collection of books go. I did a pretty good job at taking care of my books, even the ones that I had since I was little. And this is really the beginning of the collection. This is like my first or second superhero comic that I ever owned, I think. But it is beat up like this. The reason why it's beat up like this, and it looks like this was a very popular comic in my collection. When my collection was 10 or 20 or 50 books, this was the one that was at the top, that I put on top, that I read the most. This was the one that most of my friends read, that people borrowed. I can remember giving this to like a neighbor kid. Several of my friends took this and then returned it to me. Isn't that funny? And then now it turns out that this is probably a couple $100 book. But that's just how comic collecting works. I didn't buy this because I thought it was going to be some sort of investment. I bought this because, look at the freaking cover. Here's another one. So I think we went and looked at all this stuff before on the 4-color fossils. That's why it's in a stack right here. Anyway, so sometimes I do a live stream on the Graphic Man channel here on YouTube. It's time for a plug for Graphic Man. So if you don't know about Graphic Man, you should subscribe to Graphic Man. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, he does a show called The Four Color Fossils, and I go on that show not as often as I used to, but it's been a while. But this is stuff that I've showed on that show before. I'm sure of it. This is another early comic in my collection. There's a whole story behind how I got this comic. I bought this comic from a friend of mine's older brother that had just come back from Vietnam, and he sold it to me for a nickel. I think he sold it to me for a nickel because I think that that's all I had in my pocket at the time. But it's kind of a cool story, I guess. My buddy that lived down the street, his older brother had just got back from Vietnam. He was probably like 19 or 20, I guess, and he was living in the garage. The garage was like divided by a green army blanket, and it was a two-car garage, and one half of the garage, my buddy's older brother was living in there after coming back from Vietnam. I kind of get the feeling that they had him staying out in the garage because he wasn't getting along in the house. He wasn't able to comply with the wishes of my buddy's mother, and maybe they were arguing, or I'm not quite sure. But he was living in the garage, and my buddy's mom was not nice. Like, she was always, you remember your friends when you were a kid? Did you ever go hang out at your friend's house whose mom was always yelling, and your friend is always in trouble, and then you feel really bad and out of place and weird? So it was kind of one of those situations. Anyway, his stuff was all out there, like all of his stuff, like the stuff that maybe like had been his from when he was a kid or something. I don't know what, but this comic was there. Me and my buddy were like, running around because it's like the daytime. We're in and out of the garage, and he's real cool to us. He had all this army shit too, And so I look at this, and he had a stack of comics, and I just was immediately drawn to this one. I started reading it. I got like 3 or 4 pages in, and I asked him. I said, "Can I have this comic?" And he goes, "I'll sell it to you." He's like this 19, 20-year-old Vietnam vet telling like this 7, 8-year-old kid, "Yeah, I'll sell it to you." But that's exactly how it happened. And I was like, "Oh, okay." And how much? And he goes, "Well, what do you got?" And I pull out a nickel, and I gave him a nickel. And then he gave me a Paul Revere and the Raiders record. That's the whole story. I told the same story in the Four Color Fossils. We just heard it again right here. This is one of my earliest Hulk comics. This was purchased for me by my Aunt Emily at my cousin Manuel's Quick Stop. This is like the beginning of my exposure to the Hulk. I mean, this is like, other than the cartoons that I had seen, this was the beginning of me reading the Hulk. This is the first real collector comic in my collection. This was purchased for me by my mother at a real comic shop when I was about 12 or 13. I think it would have been about 13. And the same day as she bought me this, she bought me my first price guide. And, she was reluctant to do this. I think this was $13. Now this is like a couple $100 book, and it's in really good shape. But this was up on the wall at this comic shop, and I told her, I asked her if I could have that, if I could get it. She's like, "Are you crazy? It says 12 cents. $13 for a 12-cent comic." But then, the comic book guy, he did my legwork for me, and he talked my mother into buying this. He told her showed her the price guide. His name was Bob Sidebottom. He's a pretty famous comic book guy. He's passed away now, but he was the guy that owned my first comic shop as a kid. Anyway, Bob convinced my mom that comics was a good investment, and that was it. Yarns of the Yellowstone. I bought this at Yellowstone National Park when I was on vacation as a little kid in the 70s. This is like also 1974, 1975 at the actual, the Yellowstone Lodge. We stayed at the lodge. It was badass. This is a nice vacation. Yellowstone is cool. Old Faithful. Check it out. Savage She-Hulk #1. This is the beginning of my collector phase, like the beginning of me collecting comics. So this is like, what year is this? 1979. Now, I'm already buying comics for about 4 or 5 years at this point, but this is my first time I'm living with an actual comic shop. I had my own real comic shop in Monterey, California. I was living in Pacific Grove, California, which is just a hop and a skip and like a 10 or 15-minute bus ride, which is how I used to get there. I would take the bus about once a week to the comic shop. And at the beginning, at this point, I had a little bit of disposable income, so much that I was buying 2 copies of certain issues. Like, I bought 2 copies of She-Hulk #1. I bought 2 copies of Shogun Warriors #1. Did any of you guys ever do this, like when you were little, like at the very beginning, before anybody was really doing it? I mean, this was like at the beginning. This would have seemed like a really stupid thing to do. I'm not sure how I justified this in my head. You know, what was I going to do? Did I think that I was going to turn around and sell one of... Well, actually, I did do that. At certain points, I made mistakes and I sold some of my comics. Look, here's a double. And I believe I had when I bought What If #1, I bought 2 copies. And I sold one of my copies of What If #1. But this was a long, long time ago. Now, here's some Herbies. Boy, this is a great title, you guys. So this is the Dark Horse version of Herbie. I don't remember what years they did this. What year Dark Horse? Why can't I say Dark Horse right now? Anyway, Herbie is very unusual, very strange comedy title. These are reprints with one new story, I think, in each one of these. Like, and there's cool stuff like this is a John Byrne cover. Isn't that cool? Is this another John Byrne cover? I don't know. It looks like it might be. Anyway, these are really good. I recommend Herbie. Here's the real Herbie. So these are like reprints that were put out. I think there's only 2 issues that were put out by Dark Horse in maybe the early 2000s or the 1990s. But the original title is from the early 1960s, put out by ACG. Make Way for the Fat Fury. So Herbie is just a really strange character. I can't really even explain what's going on here in this comic book. It's so unusual. This guy Herbie, he's a little fat kid, and he's a superhero. You know, the Fat Fury. I'm sure you guys have heard of the Fat Fury. I mean, look at him. He runs around. He's always got a sucker. He's always got a lollipop in his mouth, right? See how he's always got these lollipops in his mouth? Well, he doesn't right there. Anyway, here he's got a lollipop. This is the... what is even happening here? So I don't know, man. It's pretty strange. This is strange stuff. Let me just show you. I mean, let's just see if we get lucky with this and see if I can. Let's pop it open and I'll show you really quick what's happening here. So Herbie is a kid he lives with his parents, and his parents are very 1950s June and Ward Cleaver like. Each issue probably has like 3 stories in it. Like, look, and all kinds of weird stuff happens, and every story will be some weird situation. I mean, there's like time travel. Ogden Whitney is the artist, and he's really good. And this Shane O'Shea, I don't think that's the real name of this writer, but I think that this one writer wrote all of these books, I think, for ACG, or a lot of them. Anyway, look, here's his parents. So and like, there's funny things in here. Like, I mean, his parents don't really like him. Like, his dad can't stand him. He's always complaining about him and stuff. And the art's fantastic, as you can see. Lollipops, special purposes. And these are the time lollipops. Look, he's going to travel through time with that lollipop and go back to the Pirates' age, to Shiver Me Timbers. So yeah, Herbie. I can't recommend this enough. This is just great for a laugh and just for a weird. It's very strange, but the humor in it is actually really good. I'm not kidding. It's good. Here is a Walt Disney Comics and Stories. This is a neat one. This is a Halloween issue. Let's just open this up and pull it out. This is another one of my favorites. I've got a large stack of Walt Disney Comics and Stories. Like, I've got a pretty good collection of these. Not at all as good as Graphic Man. Graphic Man loves this stuff, and he has a great collection of Walt Disney Comics and Stories too. And if you're interested in this stuff, you should check out his channel, Graphic Man. And Wednesdays, 4-Color Fossils. So what's happening here is what is happening? There's an apple hanging from a string with a worm. She got that side, and his side's got a worm coming out. And the boys are back here. It's like supposed to be a Halloween party. Did you guys ever do this? We did bobbing for apples, but I don't think I ever remember seeing an apple hanging from a string. Um, I do have a bobbing for apples story that is the story of how I got kicked out of Cub Scouts, asked to leave. Did anybody here, if you're watching this video, if you got asked to leave from the Cub Scouts, go ahead and drop a comment. I was kicked out of the Cub Scouts, because this kid, Gary Pratt, who I had we had many, many little wars. It was like an ongoing campaign of wars between me and Gary Pratt. There's many stories about me and Gary Pratt. Anyway, he lived in my neighborhood. His older brother, David, was a friend of mine, and he was special. He was mentally retarded, and he was a few years older than us, like 4 or 5 years older, right? And so, but he was a little kid still. Anyway, he hung out with me, and we played and we hung out. Anyway, his little brother, Gary, was exactly my age, and Gary was really fucked up to his retarded brother. I'm not bullshitting. He was an asshole. Most of the fights involved that stuff. So, but I think a lot of it had to do with, the attention that was happening at home and the rivalry, or I don't know what. I never saw that again in my entire life. You ever see a retarded kid with a brother that didn't like him? I never saw that either. Anyway, that was the situation. So we're at my house for bobbing for apples, Halloween, Cub Scouts. And a bunch of people are there, and all the Cub Scouts and the other parents and all that stuff. And it's my turn to bob for apples, and my head is down there in that big bin, bobbing for apples. And that fucking kid, Gary Pratt, pushed the back of my head and held my head down, like tried to drown me in the apple bin. So I pulled up, pushed out, thrashing, and proceeded to kick the shit out of him. And I was screaming and throwing and ripping and grabbing and cursing, and they didn't want me back. Yeah. I didn't want to be a part of it anymore after that. My mom was like, your behavior is not appropriate, and so I think it's time that you leave the Cub Scouts. And I was like, I'm fine with fucking leaving the Cub Scouts anyway. Nobody was doing it with me anyway, right? It was just me. I didn't have a dad, and she wasn't really doing anything, right? She didn't help me with the Pinewood Derby car. She didn't help me with any of it, And all she would do is just take me to Sears, to that little spot in there where you buy the clothes, right? Buy the little uniform and shit. But other than that, she never went through any of it with me. So Cub Scouts was rough, man. It was a lot of pressure on me in the Cub Scouts. I couldn't put up with the pressure. I couldn't handle it. Mentally I broke down. I had to kick the shit out of Gary Pratt, and I had to curse. I think I called some lady a bitch. I think I might have said "fuck you" to some guy. These were people's parents. These were high-ranking members of the Cub Scouts. They might have been Webelos. I don't know. Anyway, they didn't want me back. But the wars didn't stop there. There were more wars between me and Gary Pratt. Many more. I have a scar on my eye because of one of them. To this day, I got 8 stitches because of that fuckhead. Anyway. It's all a bit. You guys realize that at this point, right? I mean, Meyer Greenblatt's not even a real person. I'm a paid actor. It's all a bit. It's all scripted. Everything is scripted. This is one of my favorite titles, Daredevil and the Little Wise Guys, Daredevil featuring the Little Wise Guys. This is the period where, you've got a comic called Daredevil, and you're like, whoa, Daredevil, that sounds cool as hell. I can't wait to meet this superhero named Daredevil. There's no Daredevil in this comic book, you guys. He's not the same Daredevil that you know and love. He's not the blind guy, Matt Murdock. This is some other Golden Age Daredevil superhero who's actually kind of cool and badass with a neat uniform or neat costume. But by this point, at number 86, he's not even in here anymore. It's just the Little Wise Guys. And this is like the 1950s, pretty early on. 1952, May of 1952. So this was a really cool comic company, called Lev Gleason Publications. You can see it right here where it says Lev Gleason Publications, then it says Charles Biro. And you might think that says Bureau, but it's pronounced Biro. Charles Biro and Bob Wood, editors. These two characters right here, they were something else. This guy, Charles Biro, talk about a guy that loves to write comics. So first of all the covers are always like this, super eclectic with this crazy stuff going on and these dotted lines and action and lots of word balloons. Very high quality illustration in these books, in the Lev Gleason books, Daredevil, and very good. So Biro loves to write this stuff. Charlie Biro, they call him. On the inside, here's Charlie writing this stuff, and then Norman Moorer is drawing it, and he's really, really good as well. I mean, look at how cool this is. So, Charlie, our guy Charlie Biro, he loves to write. See? What am I telling you? Jeez, he loves to write. He loves to write. So, these stories have a formula. The formula of these stories is that you have new characters essentially every single month that are introduced in these stories. And these stories are usually crime related, as you can see what's happening here. And you might have noticed this is supposed to be the Daredevil featuring the Little Wise Guys. Have you seen any of the Little Wise Guys yet? I haven't either. Because all this stuff is all of this is giving us the background, the action, all this whole story that's happening. And then finally we get the heroes. The hero is this little kid right here. It's the Little Wise Guys. I think there's 3 or 4 of them. I forget all their names. There's 4 of them, and I can't even think of their names. The main guy is the little guy. I think his name is Slugger. Is that it? I can't remember. It's been a long time. It's been about 2, 3, 4 years since I've read one of these. Anyway, boy, does Biro love to write. Are you looking at these word balloons? Look at, and even Dilly Duncan. So here's the next story is this cat, Dilly Duncan. It's just more of the same. My God, the exposition is over the top, man. Look at this. Still, I really enjoy these books. Instead of, most comics you can be done in 15 or 20 minutes, shorter. Nowadays, the comics nowadays take you 3 minutes to read. But the ones that we love and we know and love, it's like a 15-minute, 20-minute ride. Not with Daredevil and Little Wise Guys. You might need to take an intermission. You might need to pack a lunch for Daredevil and the Little Wise Guys. A lot of reading is happening there. This is our last comic. Oh, our last comic. Speaking of assholes, these mice. I'm telling you, look at this. Tom's just trying to take a nap. He's just chilling, trying to take a nap. And these 2 mice have sawed this tree. And Jerry, I forget this little guy's name. He's Jerry's like nephew or something. I forget his name. God damn. Gosh darn it. A lot of cursing in this comic. This video about funny books for children, and I'm just cursing up a storm. Anyway, this little mouse, I forget his name, but they're just dicks. Every month they're doing something horrible to this cat. Got some of this, a 52-page comic magazine. How beautiful is it? We got these cool floating heads over here on the side. Look at this. 10 cents from Dell. I mean, it was a beautiful time and it was a beautiful place. And this is just a joy. 52 pages, man. And look at this. Flip it over on the back. We got a spark up to pick off a base runner. It says Roy Campanella. We got Roy Campanella from the Dodgers, the star catcher from the Dodgers. He was one of the boys of summer. Is that right? Am I right? Is Roy Campanella one of were they called the Boys of Summer? With he played with like a team with like a bunch of guys, right? I mean, huge stars. Eric Breen, tell me about that. He knows who played on this team. Yeah, this guy was a badass. Anyway, this is just chock full of delightful fun. The art's amazing. The stories are funny, entertaining, and even at this point, I'm telling you right now, this is not necessarily made for children. In the 1950s, in the early 1950s, when this came out, this was consumable by all members of the family. Age 8 to 80 were reading this book. This would have been something that you could have seen anywhere, and you could have seen anyone reading. I hope you enjoyed this video where we spent 30 minutes, that's 1/2 of an hour, talking about this stack of old comic books that was sitting here in my living room next to the couch. I really hope you enjoyed it. I think I might make more videos like this. This was kind of fun. And thanks for watching. And I hope you have a fantastic day or evening. I'll talk to you guys later. Look at poor Tom. He's sleeping so sound, and This is going to bash his brains in.